The Hellraiser franchise is weird because most of the movies in it are bad, but it's still one of my favorite horror franchises that I've been introduced to. At time of recording, there's 10 of them. I watched all 10 of them over the course of about a week and a half with a friend of mine. At the time, I wasn't working and just had, lots of time on my hands. And so we watched the whole thing. And I was remarkably taken in by the series. I feel like it's kind of fallen from the public consciousness a little bit. So why not talk about it and reintroduce it, pull it out, like a chain pulling you into hell, I guess. I have such sights to show you. A little history. I wasn't familiar with the Hellraiser franchise when it first came out. I saw the first one in high school, and then I think I saw another one in high school as well. In fact, I'm almost certain I did. I remember watching it on my laptop when I was young. And I'll let you figure out which one that is, because it definitely wasn't the second one, and it wasn't the third one, or the fourth one. I'll just tell you when it comes around, alright? Spoilers, by the way, for the whole series. There's no easy way to talk about it. I'm just going to go movie by movie, run down the plot, and say the good and bad things about it, and then hopefully that'll give us a kind of overview of the franchise as it stands, and that will hopefully, help me get some of my finer points out. I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just rambling at a camera, my dude. I recommend you watch at least the first 3 Hellraiser movies, maybe even the 4th one. I kind of like the 4th one, but if you've already seen them or you don't care, then come on through. Such sights! Hellraiser, 1987, or as it is now retroactively forever known, Hellraiser 1. Frank Cotton is a scumbag sadist pervert, and he has pushed the limits of pleasure to his extreme and is looking for something to feel. His wanderings lead him to a puzzle box, which Frank solves, at which point hooks and chains come out, grab him, and pull him into the box, or he just disappears. Years later, his brother Larry Cotton moves into the house. He's there with his new wife, Julia, and his daughter, Kirsty. Kirsty and Julia have a strained relationship at best. There's even the possible chance that Julia is threatened or outright hates Kirsty because of her youth. And then, after an accident where Larry cuts his hand, somehow Frank is reconstituted from another world. He explains that the box he had belonged to creatures known as the Cenobites. The word Cenobite means a monk who chooses to live in an order as opposed to in solitude. There you go. That's what a Cenobite is. Frank begins to reconstitute himself from hell, and he then informs Julia that he needs blood or life to survive. And he convinces her to bring men back to the house, where she kills them and then feeds them to Frank. Eventually, Frank is strong enough to do this himself, or at least kill them himself. It's pretty gross, and it's pretty cool, and it's pretty dark. Kirsty, this whole time, has been not necessarily accosted, but has run into this mysterious vagrant type character. I call him Alan Moore, because that's what he looks like. Looks like a grubby, filthy Alan Moore. He's just a vague, supernatural figure that we don't know much about. Kirsty discovers Frank's still alive, finds the box, opens it, makes a deal with the Cenobites, his soul in exchange for hers, because when you open the box, the Cenobites show up no matter what. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, what you're like, the Cenobites show up and take you to hell. The Cenobites agree, and we have a climactic showdown at the house. The movie was based on a novella written by Clive Barker. Clive Barker is a extremely well-known horror author. This is probably his most well-known thing, which is, I think he said, is kind of a bittersweet thing for him. Anyways, Clive Barker had been dissatisfied with the adaptations of his work so far. Rawhead Rex, I think, is the example most people cite. Barker decided to take the reins with the production of Hellraiser, seeing as it was his work that he was adapting. And he's pretty inexperienced. Hang on, I'm going to read this quote from him. "The cast treated my ineptitudes kindly, and the crew were no less forgiving. If you'd shown me a plate of spaghetti and said that was a lens, I might have believed you." The budget for this movie was $1 million, and it made $14 million back. It was a massive success, and it was a huge personal investment for Barker at the time. There's a lot of things that really work in this movie. For the purposes of time, I'm only allowed to talk about each movie with 2 main talking points. So, point number 1, Hellraiser things. So anyone who's even remotely familiar with the Hellraiser franchise knows that there are certain things that appear in the Hellraiser universe. The first is, of course, the box. The Lament configuration, it's called, or Le Marchand box. This is what is used to summon the Cenobites. The Cenobites are the horror monster. They're the horror aspect of this story, though there is a lot more to that. All of this was kind of fresh and new at the time. It was mostly slasher movies up to this point, and they were starting to get a little boring, you know? And the horror was a lot of the effects and makeup, which I think is something that cannot be understated in the first one. Obviously, by today's standards, it's a little rough around the edges. The special effects do what they need to. They are effective. The Cenobites all look unique, and they've got these wonderful designs that were based on S&M people that Clive Barker met in his travels. I guess his outings, or his nightlife. Some of the other Hellraiser things are chains, vertical light lines going along the wall. Obviously, the lead Cenobite himself, Pinhead. Whenever people think of Hellraiser, they think of Pinhead.
We have such sights to show you.
It's a wonderful lightning in a bottle moment with Pinhead, I think. Because he was never meant to be the face of the franchise. He just ended up being it because of how visually striking he is. I think he was just meant to be just one of the other Cenobites, neither greater nor lesser than them. But he turned out to be a huge hit because that gridded pattern and the halo of nails around his head is extremely effective visually speaking. And of course, Doug Bradley, who plays him, gives a great performance. We'll talk more about the importance of Doug Bradley as the series goes on. 2. Pleasure, pain, indivisible. The most important theme that is established in Hellraiser is sadomasochism. And this is more than just S&M club sadomasochism. This is the most important theme and is so prevalent, it's not even subtle. The working title for Hellraiser was Sadomasochists from Beyond the Grave. The whole movie is thrumming with a sexual tension. It's not overt. There is a lot of sexuality in the movie. It's not just the idea of physical pain and pleasure. It's also mental and emotional pain and pleasure that becomes indivisible. The expression of this is not just sex stuff. It extends to characters as well. It's not like big boob ladies out all the time. Sexy woman goes and slinks up next to you. It's more kind of underplayed. We see that Frank, who himself has become a kind of jaded sadomasochist type, he doesn't feel anything anymore.
It's never enough.
So now he's pursuing the Cenobites to get new experiences and to see if he can finally satisfy his desires. Obviously, he doesn't get what he wants when he opens the box. Julia is also kind of like that. She's a woman who has long sort of been numb to sexuality and sensuality, trapped in a loveless marriage. She goes to Frank because she's afraid of him, because no good can ever come of her and Frank having a relationship. But she doesn't stop. She goes all the way to killing other people for him, and she kind of discovers her own inner sadist. You know, she's been the masochist up until this point, sticking around in a loveless marriage and having an affair with Frank. Obviously, lots of Barker's work draws lines between sexuality and violence and fear. I think this relationship between the physical world and the emotional world in terms of sadomasochism is perfectly typified by a line Frank has in it, where he says,
like love, only real.
the sensation of sadomasochism, of the sadist or the masochist, is very similar to the heights of love, but as opposed to love, where it is purely emotional, sadomasochism has a distinct impression it leaves. Flesh and pain. The first Hellraiser really changed the game in terms of horror movies. Nothing had been like it before. I mean, obviously, sex and violence were always in horror movies, and I'm sure people have done demon summoning things before, but nothing had ever quite been done in the way that Clive Barker had done it. This very unique and creative way. And of course, it gave us Pinhead. His official name is the Hell Priest. Fans and the production crew called him Pinhead, which I think is mostly to Barker's chagrin. It kind of undercuts the character if you have a kind of silly name to call him. Pinhead. You can call him the Cenobite or the Hell Priest, but everyone's always going to know him as Pinhead because it's such an appropriate... It's an appropriate name, and so it will stick. Every time I watch this movie, I'm amazed at how simple it is. It's just a short, little, clean story with 3 or 4 characters. The Cenobites don't count as characters. They move the plot along. They don't really have defining characteristics beyond their supernatural abilities and such. Since 2006, a remake has been in the works, but has been stuck in development hell, as opposed to sexy Cenobite hell. It's just good. Watch it. It's not even that long. It's pretty short in terms of horror movies these days. Hellbound, Hellraiser II, 1988. With any successful 80s horror franchise, you are inevitably going to get a sequel. That's just how it went. Horror movies could be made really cheaply, so you could make a whole bunch of them in a franchise and never have to spend too much on them. They did usually get more expensive, though, and more elaborate. But the second one is great. Hellbound picks up right where Hellraiser left off. Kirsty has been put in a mental institution because of the way she's describing her experiences. She is under the watchful eye of a Dr. Chenard. Dr. Chenard is a psychiatrist who has become interested in the occult and is in fact looking for the boxes. When Kirsty finally describes her experiences, he becomes very interested. Chenard, having heard Kirsty's story, knows that if he spills blood on a certain mattress they found at the Cotton home, he can resurrect Julia. Or Kirsty tells him how Frank was resurrected, and so he knows that he knows Julia can be resurrected from the mattress. And he does, in a really messed up way. I don't want to spoil it because this movie goes pretty hard. This movie is significant because it opens up the mythos of Pinhead. We see that Hellraisers... we see people have been chosen to become Cenobites as opposed to just people who are tortured forever and can be brought back in the skin. There's a very good distinction made between the Cenobites and the resurrected people. They're able to move about more. They don't just get summoned places, and they seem supernaturally strong and have weird ethereal powers. Where the Cenobites are a little more restricted by, that you have to be summoned through the box. They're not just free to roam around, at least not yet. Most of the principal cast returns. Doug Bradley, Ashley Lawrence, who played Kirsty Cotton, Claire Higgins, who is Julia, and who is fantastic. Kenneth Graham, who plays Dr. Chenard, also deserves a special shout-out. He's just good. Lots of good actors in the Hellraiser series. This movie's called Hellbound because they go to hell. That's there's no way around it. They go to hell. It's pretty cool, honestly. Clive Barker did not return as director. He went on to direct Nightbreed, which is another one of my favorite Clive Barker movies. Nightbreed is great. Tony Randall, the director of Hellbound, said that his mindset or his outlook on the world is what informs the tone of the movie, and I think that's of great value. Because the first two Hellraiser movies certainly feel like they exist in a world that is grimy and dirty and very real. These are stories that could be happening right next to us and we would never notice. The entire crew of makeup and special effects artists who worked on the previous movie came back for this one. So the effects go wild in this one. There's so much good stuff. There's stop motion. There's the effects of hell. Hell looks great. It's just this huge, desolate wasteland. And you get the sense that everyone's like trapped in their own homes, in their own personal hells. Homes, not it's not. I guess you're at home if you're in hell and you belong there. That brings me quite neatly to point one: Hell and Leviathan. In this movie, we are introduced to Leviathan, who is the god of the Cenobites. Though I think one of the important things is that these are just names we give to these things we don't understand. It's very easy to fall into patterns and just repeating phrases and words. Leviathan is referred to as the Lord of the Labyrinth, which is an important thematic name with Channard, who previously in the movie, Channard has a introductory monologue where he talks about the brain as a labyrinth of experiences and memories. So Leviathan being the Lord of the Labyrinth, he's the Lord of experiences. I think Julia calls him the Lord of Flesh and Hunger. I did a little research on Leviathan. I kind of read the Wikipedia page, and I'm sure there's lots of stuff in the Bibles and things like that, but really it just seemed to be some giant underwater sea creature. It may or may not have been Tiamat from Babylonian myth, but I think that that's just the name they gave it, because it is a kind of ancient name for a great creature lurking beneath the waters, or something of immense size. Leviathan's a big thing we don't understand. Very Lovecraftian, which is also very Barker. And another thing I really like about the series. We're not going to talk about Lovecraft. So this is also something, with Leviathan being the Lord of the Labyrinth, it takes the metaphysical and brings it into a physical world. Our real world application of hell. Hell is the place where you have experienced so much pleasure that all you have left is pain. That it is only by causing or inducing pain to yourself that you can feel anything anymore. Hell is heaven taken to its most extreme. Hell is metaphysical. I like that, and I like that it bleeds into the real world and it's very dreamlike. That's appropriate for the strange, like, Freudian tone this movie sets. There's no other way to put it than that. It gets very Freudian, but it kind of makes it almost a part of the villainous aspect to it. 2. The villains of this movie are not the Cenobites. They never should be. The villains are Julia and Dr. Channard. The first two movies, the Cenobites are barely in them. I mean, with the second movie, they're in them a lot more. But the first movie especially, we don't see much of the Cenobites, and we certainly don't see much of Hell. Hell is like this place that is superimposed on our world. What I really like about the first movie is that we have two separate locations where the Cenobites show up, and they have different transitions into the Cenobite world, or the bleeding in between Cenobite and Hell world, our world and Hell, where they've got the chains, but there's still recognizable aspects. Anyways, the point is that the Cenobites aren't the villains of the movies. The villain of the first movie is Frank. He's the antagonist. He is the antithesis of our hero. Obviously, the villains of this one are Dr. Channard and Julia.
I have such sights to show you.
In this movie, Dr. Channard turns into a Cenobite. We see the process by which a human becomes a Cenobite in this weird, cool little cabinet. At the beginning of the movie, we see this happen to Pinhead. We see his flesh get carved into the grid and the nails driven in. Channard kills them. He kills the guys, the Pinhead gang. They're actually called the Order of the Gash, but I'm just gonna call them the Pinhead guys, or the Hellraiser crew. Julia is not a Cenobite. She's a returned human, which I really like as a villain, because I think there's a lot you can do with that. You know, the returned humans, they're like supernaturally strong, and they have a strange sixth sense to them. I can't say sixth sense. I like it. I like that they don't have, they're not Cenobites. They're just people. And I'd love to see a movie of just a bunch of them running around doing nasty, evil things. And I imagine like a movie with like a whole community of returned people who know about the box, and maybe very Salem's Lot meets Hellraiser, I guess is what I'm going for. And we also kind of see that the Cenobites are extensions of Leviathan. They act kind of independent, but Leviathan is a thing that underlies it all. Hellraiser 2 almost reaches into a group of movies in which the sequel is better than the first one. This is Bride of Reanimator. The first one was good, but the second one refined it. And this one almost makes it there. It's just that if the first one wasn't so simple and clean, this one might be better. But this one has a lot of, I don't want to say working parts, but there's a lot going on that is a little distracting. I do really like that it wraps up the Hellraiser story, and that it takes Kirsty's arc and sends it somewhere interesting and good. She changes as a character, and she completes an arc over the course of the two movies. And it moves, this one I also credit with pushing the idea of sensation and experience into the psychological or the Freudian. And this honestly was the perfect way to cap off the series. So why are there more? I mean, I know why there's more. As I read more reviews at the time, I was shocked at how savagely these movies were treated at the time. Most critics talk about them like they're these bad shock horror movies, and there's an element of shock to them, but it earns them, and they're more than just that. There's thought and thematic effort put into them, and because of the nature of the genre, where horror gets a bad rap, and there is a lot of bad stuff to wade through it, but it also means that a lot of the good stuff gets lost in the mire. And I feel that this was unfairly judged. So there, I guess, retribution. Congratulations, Hellraiser 1 and 2. But the idea of Hellraiser being a cheap gore slasher movie neatly ties me into Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, 1992. So this movie starts. We can already tell something is different. There's something different about this one. And it's the 90s, baby. The 90s are here, and we're ready to show you what the cool, hip new franchise is going to be. The benefit of this movie is that you can watch Hellraiser 3 without ever having watched Hellraiser 1 and 2. Which I think is good, because it gives a nice... It gives a nice, healthy sense of distance. How do I start talking about this one? Jadzia Dax is a reporter, and one day she's at a graveyard shift at a hospital, hoping that she can catch a big break with an exciting story about something that's going on. It's boring, it's terrible. And then suddenly, a guy gets wheeled in, and he's covered in chains. And these chains are like, I don't know, messed up and weird. And then, when he's pulled into the operating room, suddenly the chains come alive and pull him apart. They Jesus wept him. No one's gonna get that unless they've seen the first movie. Jadzia sees this, and she doesn't get any shots of it on camera, because she sends her cameraman away. And so her mission becomes to track down what happened to this man and why did it happen. It leads her to a club, she meets a goth girl, but we as the audience already know what's going on, because the opening scene with this guy, oh god, they said his name, he said his name so much in the movie and now I can't remember it. J.P. Monroe. We see a man named J.P. Monroe, who paradoxically sounds like a bigwig rich kid from the 1920s. I'm J.P. Monroe. But he's buying a big scary pillar with all the Cenobites in it. In the last movie, after Shenard kills them, the Cenobite group kind of, or after Kirsty beats them, I guess, they condense into a single pillar, and the pillar becomes the new gateway for them. There's no box in this one, I think. Actually, that's not true. There is a box in this one. But anyways, they're all trapped in the pillar, and it's introduced in a different way. Jadzia Dax keeps having dreams about her dead dad. There's a lot in this one. In the end, she has to fight Pinhead and other Cenobites that he's created along the way. Throughout the movie, Pinhead has to talk his way out of a pillar.
There is no good, Monroe. There is no evil. There is only flesh. The patterns to which we submitted. You will help me.
And has to get people to give him blood and sex and such. They don't give Pinhead sex, but the first scene where he awakens, J.P. Monroe is banging a chick on his bed, and the energy from that is enough to give Pinhead a charge and make him conscious. I guess I'll just finish the plot rundown, because I think it's important, or not important, but I think it's fun to explain it. Pinhead's previous version of himself, the soldier guy, he has to fight Pinhead because Pinhead is like the evil, dark reflection of him. When Channard killed them, he separated the two. He separated the Cenobite power from Pinhead, and then now they have to fight. That's what happens in the movie. That's what the movie's about. Jadzia Dax has to facilitate a fight between good Pinhead and evil Pinhead. Number one, this movie's having fun. It's a lot of fun. It's so much fun. I can't be mad at this movie. I can't be like, oh man, it ruined the franchise. It really started going downhill after that. No, this one was a lot of fun. This one was the thought experiment of, what if Pinhead was a silly slasher movie? I don't want to say silly because it's pretty like nasty and gory and such, but like as far as tonally speaking in terms of other horror movies and in terms of the first two, it's even got its own Ozzy Osbourne song, which has the name of the movie in it, of course. Hellraiser. That's all I remember from it. The tone change probably bothered fans, but honestly, I think it was fine. I think because it had enough distance from the first two, and because it feels so vastly different right out of the gate, I can separate it. The first two I could talk about forever. I have so much to say about the way they bring out their narrative and stay grounded. Is Oh, and even the silly new Cenobites that Pinhead makes out of the people he kills, the bartender and the DJ guy. The DJ Cenobite, I think, is my favorite. He's just, I don't know, I just love him. The cameraman one's a little weird, but again, it's just like, what if a slasher could make other slashers? Pinhead himself gets to be a little more campy, and I remember there's an interview, or there are probably multiple interviews, where Doug Bradley talks about how in the first movie, the only notes he ever got from Clive Barker was, do less. Do less. And I think that helps in the first two, to give him some gravitas, and to give the Cenobites some gravitas. However, in this one, Pinhead's kind of the more scheming devil type, where he has to entice people. It's a lot of fun to watch Doug Bradley actually get to do stuff. And he also gets to play his former soldier counterpart without any makeup, which he was very excited about. Number 2, Chasing Trends. Now, as much as I love Hell on Earth, it has some bad omens of the things to come. The first is the genericizing of the franchise, where it was very distinct, the tone of the first two, and now this is a little more what you would expect from a horror movie of this era, as opposed to a little indie investment from a successful author. You start to see other popular franchises from the time, or parallel franchises, seeping in. There's, I think, kind of a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street in this. There's one shot where Pinhead, he does a Jesus thing, and then it's almost identical to a shot in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where I think Freddy has his arms out. Pinhead is a little quippier in this movie. He has a lot of Freddy or slasher style one-liners. They're okay. A few of them feel a little forced and goofy. The arm-spreading Jesus bit, I think, goes on a little too long.
I am the way.
And it kind of plays into the criticisms of the previous two, of it being a thoughtless gore fest, which is unfortunate, but also is still, fun if you're into that kind of thing. Which I am. Hellraiser 4. Hellraiser Bloodlines. 1996. By the end of this list, the word Hellraiser will mean nothing to you, like it does to me. Bloodline is a strange movie. It had an extremely troubled production. In fact, the movie is credited to Alan Smithy. For those of you who live under a rock, or this is your first video about movies, Alan Smithy is a pseudonym that is used by directors frequently to hide the fact that they made a movie or were involved with a movie. It's not used anymore because people know about it now. Bloodlines takes place in 3 separate eras. The first era is the far future. It's this sci-fi, it's this gritty sci-fi future in a cheap set where this guy, he's using a robot to summon the Cenobites, kind of traps them. He puts them inside a thing. The robot opens it in this big dome. It's too hard to explain. Anyways, this guy's like, I'm going to tell you the story about my Hellraiser bloodline. And then he goes into it. Not bloodlines, it's just bloodline. So we go back and we see the guy who made the box. His name is Lamarchand. He's the greatest toy maker in all of France, at the request of this guy who, in this movie, is not the Marquis de Sade, but I believe in the original novella was the Marquis de Sade. The point is, he is a very Marquis de Sade figure, and he's got Ben from The Office. Is it Ben Schwartz? He's got one of the Office guys, and he's a kinky murderer. He's an evil sadist murderer, and the guy's his apprentice. And he's also a powerful magician. We see the laborious process by which him and his apprentice from The Office kill a woman and then clean her skin out and then give her skin to a demon, which they summon with the Lament configuration. Which is kind of interesting because it means that they use the Lament configuration in a different way as opposed to just opening it. Then we go to 1996, which at the time is the contemporary times, where we see Lamarchand's descendant is a guy, like he's the head of a toy company or something like that. He's a business guy, and he's working on designs and such. He's an engineer or an architect. I don't remember which. He's a 90s guy. He's a 90s guy. And he does the things. He is unaware of these things until he starts having weird-ass dreams, and then also, I think someone summons Pinhead. It's kind of hard to explain this movie, mostly because it's kind of boring, and my memories of it are already fading. We see that he is working on something that will infinitely refract light. It is effectively a reverse Hellraiser box, which destroys or banishes Pinhead, as opposed to summoning him. We see that this is completed at the end in the far future. You could have seen it at the beginning, too, when you see that the satellite that this is taking place on is a big unfolded cube with the Hellraiser patterns on it. It's not great. Hey, cool, connects. It had a $4 million budget and made $9 million back, which I think is the lowest returns for a Hellraiser movie so far. And you know what? It's a fine idea in terms of a story to tell in the Hellraiser universe. It feels very much like someone went, what are the Hellraiser things? Chains, white makeup, S&M stuff. The box. Everyone knows the box. Let's make a movie about the box. Admittedly, it's not horrible. It's certainly not the worst Hellraiser movie. Let's just get into it, I guess. Number 1, the Lament configuration. The box. You opened it. We came. Well, you know that thing that bad sequels do, where they take a small element, and make it bigger than it's supposed to be? That's what this movie is. They gave a copious backstory for this little guy, which I always figured was just some, extra world device, off-world device that was created in hell or something like that. In the novel, though, it does point out that it was made by a person, so I think that's kind of neat, the idea that he was influenced by darker forces to create something he didn't fully understand. I like the lament configuration also because it represents another important theme in the Hellraiser universe, which is obsession. In the previous movies, it's very thematically appropriate. The lament configuration is a character's obsession made into the real world. A box with no seeming methods of opening it. And they spend hours puzzling over it, trying to figure out how to get it open, just as they are in their own within the narrative, trying to get through the puzzle of existence or the puzzle of whatever it is they are doing. The lament configuration is kind of ethereal as well. We see in number 3, Jadzia Dax puts the lament configuration in wet cement, and the buildings that are built there have the lament configuration pattern boxes on the sides of the walls. In fact, that was the inspiration for this movie. I think at one point they punch through a wall and it's in a parking garage or something. A nice cheap place to film, a parking garage. The lament configuration is this impossible device that can twist and turn. It's another Lovecraftian element, where it's this artifact that people can find and puzzle over. We also get the strong impression in this movie that it's not just smarts you need to open the lament configuration, or you can't just brute force your way through it. There's something about it where you have to be attuned to it to use it and open it.
It's a box. It's just a box. Thank God for men of reason.
I thought this movie was going to be about how Corporation Man was accidentally selling a whole bunch of Hellraiser toy boxes to people. Like it was just like this year's hottest new item. And then the Cenobites were showing up and murdering people and taking them through these boxes, which would have been very fun. But that's not where they went. That's too much fun. I've heard the criticism that people solve it too easily, but I think the idea is that if you're attuned to it, it kind of pulls you in. The swirling, intricate patterns and the satisfying machinery and the way it's almost reactive to your touch. It's what gives it its strength and its power. The people are seduced by it as much as they are seduced by the promise of, whatever it is they're seeking. Learn in the comics that there are other means of summoning the Cenobites. Number 2, Chatterer is a dog. In this movie, fan favorite Chatterer, and my personal favorite Chatterer, comes back. This is one of my favorite aspects that gets pulled in this movie. This is one of the more fun, unique ideas they have, which is that the Cenobites can change their appearance and form. Their existence allows them to transcend the physical and make new forms for themselves when they're tired of these ones. My headcanon is that, or the story in my head, that's what I had. My headcanon is that after their battle with Shenard, the Cenobites are still very weak, and so they're slowly rebuilding themselves over the course of several years. And so because Chatterer's not strong enough to be his full form, he's become a dog. This movie's honestly incredible. There's so much to talk about. The effects, the weird 90s kitsch value. There's a puzzle-solving robot. The weird time element to it, which I think could have worked in a way. the space station that turns into a Hellraiser cube. It's so good. This was the last Hellraiser movie to be released in theaters, and it will likely be the last. I can't imagine that Hellraiser is going to make a big comeback in terms of movies and theaters. Unless, of course, the Hulu movie or the coming HBO series is really good. I don't know what the remake's going to be like. I know that they've cast Pinhead as a lady, which is interesting, because in the original story, Pinhead is this androgynous figure. In fact, most of the Cenobites are androgynous. Hellraiser 5, Hellraiser Inferno. This is the first one that I would consider to be not good, though it is interesting. This is a dramatic shift in tone, just like Hellraiser 3 is. It's 2000 now, and that game Silent Hill has just come out, and them goth kids really like it. I don't know if they're directly related, but it was just, of that same era, and that very much shows. Had a budget of $2 million and was straight to video or straight to DVD. I don't remember which. So this cop, who is the baddest motherfucker ever, because he's playing chess on a basketball course, which lets you know that he's athletic and smart. He fucks hookers to save his marriages and has a crippling drug problem. So he's real cool. He's a real character, real strong, hard man. He gets his own noir dialogue and does sleight of hand magic, which no doubt helps him get laid. This guy, I can't tell, this character that they've made, I can't tell if we're supposed to like him and cheer him on, or if he's supposed to be miserable and bad and we're supposed to hate him. I feel like it's the former, where we're supposed to sympathize with him and think, oh man, that's cool. Look how cool he is, cheating on his wife. Anyways, this detective character, Detective Boreanaz, as we'll call him, he finds a murder scene with the lament configuration. The murder scene is particularly grisly. He takes it with him somewhere, and then it solves itself, and he wakes up with a dead hooker in his hotel room. Or no, not in his hotel room. He wakes up, and then he leaves, and then someone phones him, and it's the hooker he slept with being murdered, and he discovers that later. He finds the crime scene. And then this is just the persistent pattern throughout this movie. Character dies. Detective Boreanaz is informed of it in a surreal way. He shows up to the crime scene. It looks like he's done the crime. And I thought this was leading somewhere interesting. But it was Pinhead. It was Pinhead the whole time. That's the plot twist. The plot twist is the thing we already knew. It's a back and forth between cop scenes and Jacob's Ladder-style surrealist scenes. This was also the first movie not to have any involvement from Clive Barker. In fact, he was barred from showing up due to creative differences. I believe the major creative difference here was that in this movie, Pinhead takes on a moral role. It turns out that Detective Boreanaz has made his own hell, and this is where he is now, and he just has to repeat the sequence of events in the movies forever and ever and ever. That was more Christian than Clive Barker ever wanted it to be. Hell was never meant to be the Christian hell, where the guilty are punished for their sins. It was always meant to be a dimension that, for all intensive purposes, is hell, but is not the hell we think it is. It's got its own, not pizzazz to it. They have that line in the first one.
Demons to some, angels to others.
It implies that heaven and hell are very closely related to each other, and that in this world where pleasure and pain are indivisible, heaven might very well be the same thing as hell. Time for our Chatterer check-in. In this movie, Chatterer is a walking torso. He's cool, very spooky, probably still weak from being dead. He's learning not to be a dog. However, he doesn't get to do much in this movie. The twins are back, and they're sexy ladies. Number 1, psychological horror. This is our first foray into a different subgenre of horror. Arguably, the second one could be considered psychological, psychiatral. It takes place in a mental asylum. I could talk about those first two forever. So we've already seen that the Cenobites can interact metaphysically with the world. They can inflict sensation beyond just physical. They can, attack your mind as well as your body. They're not just dudes in leather with hooks and chains. There's more to them than that. They're powerful and supernatural. This one at least tries to do something interesting and new. However, that brings me to my second point, which is that this is the wrong script. Despite the protestations of the people involved with the film, this movie is not a Hellraiser movie. It was not intended to be a Hellraiser movie, and it was based off of a script that was a supernatural psychological thriller of some kind that was then transmuted into the Hellraiser universe for brand appeal. It's fine not to focus on the Cenobites. That's kind of what the first two movies do. Well, the first one at least. The first movie very much is not about the Cenobites. The Cenobites move the story along and give the story a supernatural aspect, but they're not the main focus of the story. The main focus of the story is the humans interacting outside of that and being influenced by this supernatural world. They could be a framing device or a metaphor, and it all works. Here, though, they are literally just there for brand recognition. They're just the padding for, we need a supernatural element. Let's use Hellraiser. It's almost completely divorced from the other aspects, and there's like one death that is kind of sadomasochistic, but it's by no means the worst movie in the Hellraiser franchise. It has a consistent tone and atmosphere, and it has some good spooky visuals in terms of the psychological stuff, and has a clear through line with its plot. But like I said, it's not a Hellraiser movie. It was a different movie, and no matter how much people tell us it isn't, we know. It shows that it was never meant to be that. You know, I think it was admirable that they tried to have a Hellraiser movie that didn't rely on gore and special effects and had tried to have a slow burn of horror to it. And I think that's something that the franchise kind of really misses, or at least misses the mark on, is a slow burn horror. It's just boring because it takes a very simple and what should be a short story and drags it out to feature length. I think this could have worked very well as a short film or a comic. Alright, we're halfway through. We're going to take a short break from the movies, and we're going to do a foray into the comics. Read the title. It says Hellraiser franchise, not Hellraiser movies. This would be much shorter if it was just the movies. Most of them are bad. The end. After the success of the first movie, comics for the series were immediately being published. Clive Barker was rarely, if ever, involved in the comics, for the most part. It started with Epic Comics. Epic Comics at the time was an imprint of Marvel. It was the same thing that DC had for Vertigo. It was a space that was separated from the main brand, didn't have to be submitted to the Comics Code Authority, and could allow certain writers to play with darker themes and subject matter. Then went into Boom Comics. I have one of them here. I got lucky picking this one up. These are hard to find. It was Boom Comics, and then it was Seraphim Inc., which is Clive Barker's private personal publishing firm. I haven't read a lot of the comics, because there is a lot of comics. For the most part, the initial Clive Barker's Hellraiser comics were anthology pieces in the same universe as Clive Barker's Hellraiser, and some of them are really good. I have read Hellraiser Bestiary, which had a lot of good stories in it, as well as a good ongoing story. And I have also read the Hellraiser Nightbreed crossover comic. That's right, I foreshadowed this. Hellraiser Nightbreed Jihad was written by DJ Chichester. I hope I'm saying that right, but I doubt I am. Nightbreed I already loved, and now I've grown to love Hellraiser, and to see them interact was very fun. It's got a tone similar to Freddy vs. Jason, but more serious. You know what? A tone similar to Sadako versus Kayako. One of my favorite things is that by some contrivance of circumstance, the bad guys have to help our heroes in the situation. In this story, Cenobite is able to convince Leviathan that the Nightbreed have to be purged, and so a holy war is declared on the Nightbreed for being a threat to hell or some similar thing. And Pinhead's kind of mildly against this, not because he likes the Nightbreed, but it's out of a matter of principle or something. It's very fun. It's a lot of fun to read. It introduces some fun new Cenobites. There was a lady who is now a bird or an owl or something. Pinhead has this tic where he's constantly taking out the pins and rearranging them in his head, an effect which works in the comics because you can visually draw that, but would have been very difficult to do constantly in film. The character of Pinhead is widely varied in the comics. Sometimes he's the savior of all Cenobites, and he's the most powerful, important guy ever, and then sometimes he's just like, I'm a dude. The lead antagonist in this refers to Pinhead as Xipetotec, the Aztec god of death and resurrection. His name means Our Lord the Flayed One, which I think was very cool and appropriate and feels very natural with Pinhead, and the Cenobites especially, because they pull the skin off of people, and then people are reborn without skin. He refers to Chatterer as Mictlanteculti, who is a death god in Aztec. The Mayan equivalent, I believe, was Apuash, which cements to me the idea that once you become a Cenobite, you are unshackled from time and space. Like, there's rules, but you can exist beyond your own time and space. But I don't know if that's ever expanded on. Like I said, I haven't read a lot of the comics. I do think the comics inflate Pinhead's importance in the series a bit, where he's a bit more like, I'm the most important Cenobite ever. Here's a few of the short stories that I liked. A hoarder turns her house into a lament configuration by hoarding and putting everything in a precise order. Pinhead is captured by poachers who have been hired by the Vatican to steal his pins. A man gives his autistic son the lament configuration to stop him screaming, and the Cenobites turn him into a Cenobite who puts people back together after they are exploded. This has a problem, which is that with all these Cenobites and all these lament configurations and all these ways of summoning them, it does make the universe feel a little crowded. And before, I always got the impression that there were one or two or a few lament configurations at most. Where's mine? And then the rest of them, that was one of the only ways to summon them. And so it was very rare that anyone actually managed to, open the box and summon them. And that keeps the stories small and self-contained. I knew that was going to happen. Okay. Hellraiser 6. Hellraiser Hellseeker, 2002. So this one and the previous one are kind of similar. Not really. I mean, they both have different plots, but there's some weird recurring themes that made them mesh together in my mind. They don't look the same, and they're not really the same plot-wise, but they have a very similar feel to them. The quality at this point for the Hellraiser franchise is starting to sputter a bit, and we get trapped in this mire of mid-2000s wannabe psychological horror. I mentioned Jacob's Ladder before. Jacob's Ladder is a great movie, and it's a psychological horror in which the horror aspect is underplayed. I'll try to be as fair as I can, but even being fair is sometimes cruel. This movie was made for $3 million. This one is actually the tentative return of Kirsty Cotton, although she goes by a different last name now because she's married to the protagonist. That's right, Kirsty is not our protagonist for this movie. Our main character is Trevor, who has a similar unpleasant brick face like our previous protagonist. He's not a cop, he's just an office worker. This movie decided to give him convenient amnesia, which is not very interesting. The summary of the plot is that he tries to use the lament configuration to kill Kirsty, or he gets Kirsty to open the lament configuration so he can kill her, collect her life insurance, and then there's no body or anything. It's the perfect murder tool, the lament configuration, because it leaves no evidence. At least most of the time it doesn't leave evidence. It depends who's writing the story. This movie is about how every woman wants to fuck him. That's not true. Trevor does get a lot of horniness going on. The previous guy, I think he only bangs one hooker, but in this movie, Trevor, every woman wants to jump his bones. And either that's meant to play into the psychological aspect, or it's just bad writing. I'm leaning more towards the latter. This guy, Trevor, he also starts getting flashbacks or premonitions of people dying who are close to him. And people are like, did you know this person died? And he's like, I guess. Very, again, similar to the last one. It feels like it follows a very lockstep pattern of, here is the regular element, and now here is the psychological horror element. This one's a little more muddled than the last one. Not as strong of a through line in terms of the plot. In the end, what happens is that Kirsty does the one thing she knows how to do, or rather the one thing she's known for from Hellraiser 1, which is negotiate with the Cenobites. The sort of twist at the end of the movie is Kirsty makes a deal to exchange her souls for the 5 souls of the people who were conspiring to have her murdered and collect her life insurance, which is her husband Trevor, his friend, a boss lady, and 2 other people who I don't remember. That's it. Maybe it was only 3 people and I've just misremembered the movie, but that goes to show what we're dealing with here. As I said before, the main character, Trevor, in this one, has amnesia, which isn't very interesting. It would be more interesting if he was consciously making an effort to kill his wife. Then he has to kind of like weasel his way through, and there's more tension in each scene, as opposed to him blindly staring at everyone as they exposit at him and tell him what he's like, even though he keeps insisting that he loves his wife, even though he tries to kill her. This is something that was similar to the last movie. There's like a strained relationship with the wife, or they do something bad to their wife and then try and say that it's for their benefit or something like that. The previous Detective Boreanaz, he's banging hookers and he's like, I do it to save my marriage. If it means I go back to her, then what does it matter? And then this guy's like, I love my wife. Throughout every single time someone comes and confronts him about how it's obvious that he's trying to kill his wife, he's like, I love my wife. And I don't remember any of this stuff. Which is, I mean, I would use that excuse. The writer for this movie, Michael Lent, supposedly wrote the spec script for Hellseeker, and then apparently all that remained of his script was the first 10 minutes. The original script is pretty wild. It's about a man who gets burned in a fire at a hacker laboratory where a John Doe has to piece his life pack together and track down a missing video game designer while being pursued by police and the Cenobites. Which, the movie was filmed in Vancouver, Canada. Yay, Canada! The director, Rick Bota these nuts, he went against the studio and sent a rough print to Hellraiser, to Mr. Hellraiser. Rick Bota went against studio mandates and sent a copy to Clive Barker to review and give him some suggestions. Apparently, Barker gave some suggestions for the 3rd act. There was, in fact, a climax of the movie which was written by Doug Bradley, but was removed or cut entirely. Oh, and there's one scene in which the lament configuration is a sphere and then it becomes a cube, which was really cool to me because it adds to the metaphysical aspect of the lament configuration. Point number 1, this movie uses psychological horror to transition from scene to scene. That happens a lot, where it'll have the psychological aspect, and then suddenly he'll be in a new location without much rhyme or reason, and it'll just be moving you along. It's not a huge problem, it's not very interesting. At least Inferno had a consistent kind of transition from scene to scene. It wasn't always perfect, but at least it was there. I really wish there was a good psychological Hellraiser horror movie, because most of them aren't, and a fair number of them are psychological horror, and I do think that a Hellraiser film as a psychological horror could work. It hasn't so far. This one just hops around until we get to the end where Pinhead laboriously explains the plot of the movie to us. A few nice touches on a rewatch, but that's really only if you want to rewatch this movie. Number 2! Boring Cenobites. The Cenobites have been mostly recast. I don't remember if the twins show up again in this one. There's a new guy called Bound. Ooh. He looks like a generic, like, Silent Hill monster or Resident Evil monster. I guess it works because he's just like a random servant Cenobite, and I'm sure the makeup was much easier for the actors. None of the interesting ones are there. None of the ones with cool designs, like the lady Cenobite, who we never see again after the second one. 3! I know I said I was going to limit myself to 2 points per movie, but these 2 points were short, so I can do a third one. My third point is that Kirsty Cotton should have been the main character of this movie, or at least the main supporting character. Kirsty shows up at the beginning and the end of the movie with a few scenes in between. They should have been working against each other. We should have actually seen the ongoing battle and cut between their perspectives. And then things get weirder and psychological, and as the space around them becomes more fluid and they're able to more clearly understand what's going on, one of them starts getting the upper hand on the other through, manipulation, and maybe they're both chasing the box or something like that. Kirsty could have had a great arc here. She could have had a full acceptance of the box as either a responsibility or perhaps as a Cenobite herself. She could have had a future beyond that. In the comics, she's actually with a group of other people. They call themselves Harrowers, and they hunt down entry points for the Cenobites and destroy them in order to stop the Cenobites from leaking into our world. In that same comic series, she becomes the new Pinhead. It's very interesting. I shouldn't say it's very interesting because I haven't read it. It's a logical, interesting place for her character to go from hatred to acceptance, effectively. Kirsty could have also become the Alan Moore Bone Dragon. She is now the new bearer of the Lament configuration, handing it off to the people either she thinks deserve it, or just she sends it to where it needs to be. I just feel like this movie could have had more Kirsty and could have done something interesting with her, but instead we have to focus on this amnesiac dope who isn't interesting because he doesn't have any stakes in the plot, because everyone's just kind of accusing him, and he's just completely oblivious to whether or not he's actually done anything bad. Power Rangers Hellraiser crossover.
Make Pinhead a big, chunky alien with pins in his head.
Kamen Rider kicked Pinhead so hard he exploded. Hellraiser 7. Hellraiser Deader, 2005. This one was filmed in Romania, and the movie follows journalist Alex, who covers the seedier and darker stories other journalists are too chicken shit to do. Her boss, not Charles Dance, sends her to Romania to investigate a cult that has supposedly found a way to resurrect people after they kill them. She's shown a video in which a girl is shot and then immediately brought back to life by the leader of this cult. It's a ritual where they get killed by the cult, and then the leader puts his mouth on their mouth and breathes life back into them, or he kisses them. Kiss of life, basically. She investigates, sees some weird, surreal things, gets spooked by Pinhead at the beginning of each act, and then she's plagued by visions of her traumatic past. Her father abused her. And then she meets the cult leader. He kills her and resurrects her. And then it's a battle for her to reclaim her soul and the souls of those who have been killed and resurrected. She wins this battle by refusing to stab herself. And then when Pinhead shows up, she does stab herself. And this time it's good that she stabbed herself and she wins. It ends. Her body is not found among the rubble of the building, which exploded because Lament configuration shenanigans. And we get a Kirsty Cotton cameo where she's just shown up. I think that Ashley Lawrence, she broke the gag order for this one. I think she said something along the lines of, the amount they paid me wasn't even enough to pay off my new fridge. So there you go. Her name's Kirsty Turner now. I actually think that this one has the strongest sense of atmosphere since the first or second ones. This one has such a heavy, gritty tone at first. I think like the first shot is like a pan across of this grimy tabletop with a cigarette burning, and the music is great. It very effectively communicates a dull horror that is pervading everything. Great atmosphere, but as always, they manage to bungle it. Usually in trying to take a script that is not Hellraiser, once again, and shoving Hellraiser into it. That has been the consistent trend for the past few movies. I actually watched this one partly with a friend who lives in Romania. We were looking at all these dilapidated, grimy shots of streets, and she was just like, yep, that's just what Romania looks like. So, Romania, great atmosphere for horror movies. Clive Barker was not even tangentially involved with this one. I assume at this point Clive Barker basically washed his hands of the movies and moved on to work on other stuff. Production for this one was evidently very difficult, not because of budgetary concerns or clashes, but because the American cast and crew could not understand the Romanian crew and cast, and so it made things extremely difficult. Which I just think is funny. I like that this has a kind of death and resurrection theme to it. What does it actually mean to be dead? The name actually makes sense after a while, Deader. And of course, you can kind of tie it into that whole Jipe Totek thing with Pinhead. Point number 1. Pleasure, pain, indivisible, but different this time. In this, the overwhelming theme is emotional against physical death. The people who join the Deaders, which is the cult, they're called Deaders, stupid name, but they are people who have become extremely dissatisfied with their real lives and have become numb to the experience of this world, which is another form of pleasure and pain being indivisible. Not simply that the heights of ecstasy bring you so close to a sensation beyond your body that you can't tell what's pleasure and pain anymore, but more accurately, you are so numb to everything that you can't distinguish between pain and pleasure anymore. So that theme actually fits quite well with the Hellraiser universe and the established sadomasochism type stuff. Being numb to things is what draws people to the Lament configuration. It's part of what drives them to become obsessed with experience. Unfortunately, though, like most of the themes in this movie, it's kind of underdeveloped. I really actually want to be kind of nice to this one, because it's not awful, it's okay. I think at the end it still does have that problem where it's Pinhead's job to come in and give us exposition we needed to fill in the plot so people don't get upset or something, but other than that, it's alright. There is one thing, I have one gripe, which is that at the end of the movie, while they're digging through the rubble, the reporter's like, oh look, they found this in the rubble. What could this be? Does it mean anything? This strange puzzle box was the only item recovered. And it bothers me because, one, they just hand it to her like she's... Like, you'd think this would be like a police investigation or something, but they just hand it to her and are like, hey, you want to report on this box? Just because we, the audience, need to see that the box is okay, even though we didn't need to see that. We know. Hellraiser 8. Hellraiser Hellworld. Also 2005. This one is actually one of my favorites, not because it's good, but because it has such a distinct vision behind it. It captures a mid-2000s embarrassing, edgy atmosphere. You know, that mid-2000s, like, version of cool, and especially that early gamer cool. Oh man, look at us playing MMOs. We're so cool. Man, I'm getting so much push playing World of Warcraft. And it has that very early 2000s, like, misunderstanding of internet culture and of gaming culture and things like that. This movie does have the benefit, though, of having a hot young Henry Cavill in it. He is a douchey, character. Very typical for a horror movie. He spends a lot of this movie disrespecting women when he should be disrespecting me. This one's plot is actually surprisingly convoluted. Baseline, it's a teen slasher movie. It tries to capture all the things that teens of this day and age like, and throws them into a movie to try and make them cool. Hellworld is an MMO that these teens play that they then play so good that Lance Hendrickson sends them personal invitations to attend his server closing party, and that's it. They then show up at the party and get picked off one by one by the Cenobites. I don't have much to say other than that. It's going to be hard to talk about this one without talking about the plot twist, which is that the plot twist is that Hellraiser wasn't real this whole time, and Lance Hendrickson just drugged these teenagers and slowly killed them with hallucinations. He put them in coffins and then put a phone next to them, and then he would call the phones periodically to prompt them and suggest them into various horrific scenarios. I don't know what they're trying to do with Lance Hendrickson's character. It's so weird. He's meant to be like a cool, hip video game designer, but he's just like an old man. I don't know how to explain how they've miscast him here. What?
That sounds like shit.
Oh yes, and the movie ends with, it turns out Hellraiser is real. It wasn't just a cool MMO that went everywhere, which I think is an interesting idea. Hellraiser, but it's an MMO, and you have to work your way through stuff, and then the Cenobites go digital. That was the tagline for this movie. The whole video game and meta aspect factor into it very rarely. So this movie was released the same year as Deader, and was also filmed in Romania at the same time. This is Dimension Films, who at this point were making the movies. This is them hedging their bets. They're like, oh, we're going to make a weird psychological horror movie to appeal to someone, and then we're going to make a teen slasher movie to just try and get the lowest common denominator. Which of the two is more successful? I don't know. I didn't look it up. It's hard to get returns for movies that aren't in theaters. There is only like an approximate number of returns. Oh, and yes, the other thing is that the stars of this movie were also conveniently filming in Romania at the time. I believe Lance Hendrickson was filming Mimic 2, and obviously Doug Bradley was filming Hellraiser Deader. Point number 1, the meta. After the success of Wes Craven's Scream, which at this point is, I think, 5 years old, horror movies tried to do the meta thing, where, Scream was a satire of horror movies, and I have a friend who's like, Scream ruined horror movies for a long time, and they're kind of right. Scream was highly influential, especially in the slasher genre, which had been dipping for the most part, and then Scream brought it back to life with this fresh new element of being able to examine horror movies from within horror movies. Hellraiser Hellworld tries to do this. It doesn't do it good at all. There is one scene I remember where they discuss the meta aspect of it, which is some lady yelling on a phone, like in Scream.
I hope this night is everything you dreamed it could be.
How obviously cryptic that was. Why don't I just go ahead and call you Pinhead?
If that's what you want to think.
Get your mythology right, buddy. First I have to open the box, then Pinhead appears, the hooks and chains, but none of that's happened. Why? Because none of it's real.
And it's not even, it doesn't comment on any of the tropes it does. It just runs through the tropes. There's no clever aspect to it. It is just, we wanted to integrate this meta aspect, presumably because this is what slashers are like now. As I understand it, this whole aspect of, like, Hellworld being an in-universe... This is the thing that makes it confusing. Hellworld is the name of the in-universe franchise for Hellraiser. Hellraiser, the movies, aren't real, but Hellworld is popular enough to have its own dedicated fan base and franchise, and has all the iconography from the Hellraiser movies, but is its own thing that is equally famous. It's very weird. 2. Pinhead is not a good slasher. Pinhead and the Cenobites have a very specific niche that they fill. And in this, he's just like, he could have been anyone. He could have been Jason or Freddy or any of the other serial killers out there. But in this movie, Chatterer, I think, shows up once or twice. The first time he shows up, he's Henry Cavill, which gives me weird feelings. But the second time he shows up, he cuts Lance Hendrickson in half with a giant weapon. It's great. But I don't have much else to say about this movie. Hellraiser 9. Hellraiser Revelations, 2011. So it's been a full 6 years since the last sequel, and, well, the rights to Hellraiser are about to lapse. I think it was the Weinstein Company just made this movie out of a desperate attempt to hold on to the rights for Hellraiser. You know that Roger Corman Fantastic Four that was never released but was made to hold on to the rights to Fantastic Four? This is that, except it was released. Here's the big plot twist. This is the other one I saw in high school. I went from arguably one of the best Hellraisers to the worst. Even when I was a teenager, I knew this was bad. I don't actually have much to get into the preamble of this one. I'll read you this quote from Doug Bradley in an interview with DreadCentral.com. He was in discussions. This is the first movie where he's not playing Pinhead, and so he was in discussions. He put it this way. Following these discussions, and after reading the script and giving it due consideration, I have decided not to participate. The ink is barely dry on the script, and it is scheduled to be in front of cameras in 2 weeks, and in the can by the middle of next month, at the time, September 2010. The minuscule shooting schedule is more than matched by the budget. Whether or not this means that someone else will be stepping up to play Pinhead, I have no idea. I guess we can watch this space together. One way or another, this does not seem to me to represent a serious attempt to revive the Hellraiser franchise. However, I wish everyone who will be directly involved with the making of this film good luck with it. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I could not have said it better myself. The plot rundown is this. 2 teens, college students, go down to Mexico to fill their heart's desire. They go missing on this trip, and the only thing that is recovered from them is a camera, and that's it. Part of the movie is kind of found footage. It's more of a transition into the flashbacks to Mexico. And then the other half of the movie takes place in a suburban family home where we see the family dealing with the loss of these 2 kids, or the two grieving families. That's it mostly. And then the Bone Dragon Alan Moore guy shows up to be scary, and then Pinhead is... I think it's implied that he's inside the Lament configuration, listening to all this stuff going on. Or at least that's the impression I got. There is a plot twist at the end of the movie where it turns out that the 2 guys who went down to Mexico have actually switched places because one of them opened the box and was taken by the Cenobites, and the other one took the Julia role and had to kill people to get him back. But when he decided to stop killing people, the guy who got killed took his skin and went back up to the families. I think that's a fun little twist. I do want to give a quick shout out to the guy who plays the brother character. 1, he got my nomination for being most bangable in film, and 2, he just makes bizarre choices.
You stealing my suit?
Shit,
Get the fuck out of this bullshit Generica! They want to experience your flesh.
He's just having a grand old time. I think that there were not enough skinless human antics in the other movies, and this is the first one that actually does it. Which brings me to my first point. Number 1, Hellraiser movie. So as bad as this movie is, I cannot deny that it is a Hellraiser movie. The script, written by Gary J. Tunnicliffe, is actually, in my head, a perfect Hellraiser movie. I think The Suburbs is a great setting for Hellraiser. I think that the whole idea that there is a happy veneer over everything, and that when you peel back the skin, there's this ugly, seedy underside, is brilliant, and theoretically, it's got all the elements in place. The whole skinless murder mystery aspect, I think, is a lot of fun. I wish that had been played up a little more. So it was less about being boring and more about a murder mystery involving a resurrected human who no one knows who they are because they could be anyone because they can take people's skin. So I think that in itself would have been an interesting premise, and then you slowly build up to the Cenobites showing up. It's almost good. I so want to be in this movie's corner. This one was the funniest to watch with people, but it was incredibly embarrassing. The movie itself looks like a TV movie of the week. It looks very cheap. Number 2, Doug Bradley. So this is the first Hellraiser movie not to feature Doug Bradley as Pinhead. Consistently throughout the entire franchise, he has been playing Pinhead, and I will admit that when I was first watching this, I didn't think that Doug Bradley was that important to the character of Pinhead. I felt that with a good actor, just about anyone could play Pinhead. How wrong I turned out to be. In this movie, he's played by a man named Stephen Collins. I've never heard of Stephen Collins before, and I assume that the reason he got the job was because he does a decent vocal impression of Pinhead previously.
You have a darkness that rivals my own, Nico. It will be a very special pleasure to rip you apart.
He doesn't look like Pinhead, and in fact, with all the makeup and stuff on, he looks like a giant, oversized baby version of Pinhead. It's very strange. It's at this point I'm going to give kudos retroactively to Doug Bradley for his performance in all the other ones, because after seeing this one, I realized just how much presence and gravitas Doug Bradley gives to the role of Pinhead. I guess that's it, really. I don't have much else to say about this one. I recommend watching this one, if nothing else. Like I said, watch it with friends. I can see a better version of this movie in my head, with a tighter, clearer script. It doesn't even have to have a bigger budget, because you can just film in a suburb somewhere, and then you can immediately get that impression of what the suburbs are like, regardless of where you are. A nice suburban neighborhood masks a roiling, unmentionable terror underneath it. Very Stephen King. I could also see this as a gay movie. In fact, I mostly interpret movies in a gay way, because I love cock. I could picture it as a gay movie where the two guys who go down to Mexico are actually fleeing the social pressure of the suburbs to live a normal life and have a heteronormative upbringing. They go down to escape that and only find themselves drawn into hell. It's not a great metaphor, but, I mean, gays would love it. In this movie, Chatterer is a sexy lady. Good for him. Hellraiser 10, Hellraiser Judgment, 2018. This was once again written by Gary J. Tunnicliffe, the one who wrote the previous one, who I said had a decent script. And he also wrote Hellworld. So there you go. He's a longtime veteran of the series. And I think he has a decent grasp of what the series should be like, where there is a focus on other characters, and then the Cenobites kind of help push the plot along, and are a supernatural element to be woven in. However, I will say that in viewing these two scripts, they feel somewhat unrefined. They feel very straightforward and don't have a lot of edge or strong sense of creativity to them. That comes later in the production. The basic rundown of this plot is very similar to Inferno, where there is a cop who is investigating a serial killer, a particularly brutal serial killer, very, very Hannibal. The two main cops are brothers. They're like a famous cop-brother duo or something, and then they have a third cop who joins them. About halfway through the movie, maybe a little more, it's revealed that the older brother of the cops is the serial killer. He was a war vet, and his experiences over there traumatized him so much that he became a serial killer, I guess. Heavy religious themes in his serial killings as well. Unfortunately, I would have liked this reveal earlier on, because it would have made it more interesting to watch the characters try to... The other detectives kind of figure it out a little quicker, or at about the same rate as the audience does. And so it would have been interesting to see them, revealed at the same time, have both of the opposing elements trying to outmaneuver each other. But it's all pretty straightforward. The Cenobites are running this, judgment chamber. There's a new thing they're doing. This leans very heavily into the idea of them being demons and having retribution for people's sins, which I don't like on the one hand, because it was never Clive Barker's intention to give the Cenobites a Christian edge. The use of the term hell and demons was convenient It's a way of us describing something that we don't fully understand, but that has left a sort of subconscious impression on us. This one had a budget of $350,000, which is the lowest budget recorded yet. And it shows, but I think they do a lot to try and avoid that, and there's a lot of creativity in the way the film is made. Doug Bradley did not return for this one as well. The new actor for Pinhead is pretty good. He's got presence, I think he knows what the role has to be. He's not hamming it up like the guy before was, who was having a lot of fun, but Pinhead needs to be more reserved.
What the fuck is going on?
Silence. Your pitiful adultery is beneath me.
Point number 1. Things are gross again. So, the first 2 Hellraiser movies were critically panned for being, gore fests or whatever, but while the effects were, gross and visceral, after that, they became they didn't get more, I don't want to say more tame, but it got more repetitive. We'd get the chains going through some people and stuff like that. But this one is the first one where it feels like they've actually made an effort to make things a little grosser and unpleasant. It's pretty nasty. Very gross and grimy and grungy, and I like that. It fits the tone of the intentions of Hellraiser. I always feel like the grimier and grittier you make it, and then just introducing the one supernatural element of the Cenobites is exactly what a good Hellraiser movie and script does. This one, as I said, does okay at both of those things. Point number 2. I could be your angel or your devil. They have a line in the first Hellraiser, angels to some, demons to other. The franchise tends to lean more heavily on the demon side of things, and particularly with Inferno, there was a strong, sudden shift in the morality. I've never felt that the Cenobites were meant to be moral in any way, and I think the thing that cements that really for me is Chatterer's death in Hellraiser 2, where we see he's just a fucking kid. Holy shit, what a twist. Chatterer's like a 16-year-old kid. It's fucked up. That shows that it doesn't matter who you are when you find the Lament configuration. If you open it, they come for you and they take you, regardless of who you are, what you've done, or what you believe. And that is what kind of adds an element of fear to the Cenobites. It's not just, if you're good, they won't get you. They'll get you regardless because you open the box. I also feel that throughout the series, and especially in the first 2, religious imagery and themes were used not to reinforce the idea that these religions are true or real, but more in a kind of mocking sense, as if to say, everything you believe is not right. There is a supernatural aspect to this world, but all it is pain and suffering. Cruciatus aeternum. There is no heaven, or heaven and hell are the same place. What's nice about the comics is that they kind of blend in other religious elements. By blending other religions and faiths into the vague Christian language of Hellraiser, it gives you a sense that this isn't just a angels and demons thing. This isn't just a Christian interpretation of this. These creatures are well beyond any meager concepts of religion we have. This movie goes full heaven and hell. There is a heaven, there is a hell. The problem is that I just don't like the moral dichotomy of that, but it works in terms of the script for this movie. I understand what they're going for, and it's fine, but I don't like it, okay? It's almost regressive to relegate a horror movie to being a moral authority. That's one of my problems. Hellraiser was never about that. It wasn't about relegating a moral authority onto people. It was about what happens when you can't feel anymore, or what happens when you can't tell the difference between pain and pleasure anymore. So that's it, really. Less morality, more cool Hellraiser stuff. When I watched this with someone, they said that it could be like a play, which I guess is kind of true, because it has about 3 locations with a few shorter scenes in different ones, and it has a tiny cast. Basically Pinhead, and then the 3 detectives, and a wife character. That's it. I think that that's true to an extent. And even I think the first Hellraiser could be a play, because that takes place in mostly one location and has an even smaller cast. I would love to see it. I would love to see a on-stage version of Hellraiser. We're done with the movies. We're going to talk about some of the other versions of Hellraiser. The Hellbound Heart. So, before we get into the other Hellraiser media, there isn't much, so don't worry, this won't take long. I do want to take a moment to talk about the Hellbound Heart. It's not a long book, as you can clearly see. It's a novella. This is the story that Clive Barker wrote that inspired Hellraiser. It's basically the first movie. In the book, Larry Cotton is called Rory Cotton. Julia is basically the same. Kirsty is not related to any of them, or either of them. She is just a friendly neighbor who has a crush on Rory. And the Cenobites are 4 genderless beings. It gets very specific about the Cenobites. There's like a mythos to them. There's 4 of them, and they're these 4 androgynous beings. They are, for lack of a better term, the ones we see in the movies. We get descriptions of them, and we get one that looks like Pinhead, one that looks like Chatterer, and then the other 2 get a rougher, vague description. These rough, vague descriptions are effective in making them feel ghostly. There is a 5th Cenobite called the Engineer, and those of you who have actually seen Inferno now know where that is coming from. The Engineer is a mysterious 5th Cenobite who, I'm not certain, in the book, she appears to Frank Cotton as a lady, a sexy lady on a throne of heads, and then later to Kirsty as a being with luminous eyes. I want to believe that the Engineer, being the head Cenobite, has no physical form and adapts to whoever is opening the Lament configuration at that time. The Cenobite that resembles Pinhead is just another Cenobite. There's no emphasis given to them. They are just one of them. The stuff with the Cenobites in the Hellbound Heart is far more ethereal than it is in the movie. There's this very ghostly sense to them as opposed to the very, matter-of-fact physical way they appear. The Lament configuration in the book, as far as the description goes, is a featureless black cube, which gives no hints as to how it's opened or moves or anything like that, which is fascinating in one regard, but on the other regard, I do really like the design of the box. However, I do like the idea of this object that is just an impossible puzzle to stare at, and there's nothing that you can do to figure out how to open it. It takes Frank Cotton weeks to figure out how to open the box. The novel also seems to indicate that there is only one Lament configuration, which admittedly I like better. I like the idea of this world that is mostly grounded, but has one supernatural element to it. Fun fact, in the book, the only reason Kirsty is able to open the Lament configuration so quickly is because in the book she hits Frank over the head with it, and blood seeps into the mechanisms, revealing where certain parts and pieces are, and which allows her to open it and take it apart. Or rather, maybe Hell's there, and the Lament configuration is the only gateway in. I like that because it makes the stories feel tighter and smaller, like they could be happening right next door to you. I never minded that there were more than one Lament configurations, but it does crowd the universe a little, you know. How can no one have discovered these things? Why aren't there people like the Harrowers in the movies? Hellraiser 1990. Hellraiser 1990 was a video game that never saw the light of day. It was advertised, and there's a few screenshots floating around, but other than that, it was never made, and no one's quite sure what happened to it. It was to be developed for the NES by a company called Color Dreams. Color Dreams was one of the first companies to bypass Nintendo's cartridge lockout system, which meant that you couldn't use off-brand cartridges in an NES. It meant that you had to buy from Nintendo. But American companies found a way around this, and Color Dreams was one of the first ones. The founder of Color Dreams, Dan Lawton, had seen Hellraiser 1 and thought it would make a good video game, and began the process of adapting it. He was able to convince his partners and the movie studio that it would be a good idea, and acquired the rights to Hellraiser, spending about $35,000 to $50,000. The game was developed using an improved version of the Wolfenstein 3D engine. The game would have involved you as a character being trapped inside the Lament configuration, and then having to maneuver around inside it, get to the outside, change it from the outside, which changes the interior, and then escape, continue your escape, all while being pursued by the Cenobites. Lawton was also aware that the NES could not handle this kind of game, and had to hire an engineer to try and develop a new type of cartridge that would be able to be processed on the NES's systems. The other possible method that they could have used was to make an add-on for the cartridge that could then be attached to the cartridge and then inserted into the NES, but developing this would have proved more expensive than the cartridge itself. Because of the high cost of selling these, they were called super cartridges, this would have been a very expensive game at the time. The other major issue that arose was that it was an unlicensed game, and video game retailers at the time began to stop selling cartridges that weren't licensed by Nintendo, presumably because Nintendo made some powerful legal threat against them, because that's, Nintendo. The fact that I've even said their name 3 times in this video. So, combined with the fact that retailers didn't want to sell it, and the game's estimated development cost would have been $2 million, the game would have, in all likelihood, run Color Dreams out of business. Hellraiser was worked on for a few months, and then quietly cancelled. Again, the only evidence of its existence being a few advertisements in various games magazines. It is possible, some have purported, that this was not a real game at all, that it was a advertising campaign by Color Dreams to drum up sales, but there's no proof either way. Color Dreams is now called Wisdom Tree Games, and focuses exclusively on creating Christian-themed games. So, we wouldn't get Pinhead's video game debut until about 2 decades later.
Hellraiser 11, Dead by Daylight.
On September 7th, 2021, Dead by Daylight released the 21st chapter of its ongoing seasons, I guess, which was a Hellraiser expansion. I'll have to do a little background on Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical multiplayer game where you basically play out the events of a horror movie. There are 4 survivors who have to creep around and repair generators, all while being pursued by a malicious killer. It's very simple, very much easy to learn, difficult to master. As far as it stands right now, the Hellraiser DLC was not well received. He's one of the lowest rated killers. However, I am obviously a bit biased, but I thoroughly enjoy playing it. Mostly because playing as the Cenobite, as he's called in the game, requires you to actually have skill and outthink the players, as opposed to just having your stealth on and waiting until you can get a one-hit kill, Michael Myers. The Cenobite has 2 main weapons. The Lament configuration, if left alone for too long, will initiate a chain hunt, in which chains will continuously spawn and hook into players, preventing them from doing certain actions and slowing them, until someone finds the cube and solves it. The problem is that as you solve the cube, it reveals your position, and Pinhead, or the Cenobite, because you can also play as Chatterer, the Cenobite is able to teleport to your location, and this could easily give them an instant catch on you. But the other main tool is Possessed Chain. It's basically a long-range attack. You can make a gateway appear at certain points, and then from that gateway you can spawn a chain which you control and can hook into survivors. Once you hit a survivor with a chain, additional chains will spawn. You can also, if you find the Lament configuration, you can instantly initiate a chain hunt, and that's very useful because it reveals all players. When a survivor's solving the Lament configuration, you can teleport to them, but teleporting's a bit of a gamble, because you never know if they're pulling you farther away from a generator that you need to be watching, or if they've just cluelessly stumbled across the Lament configuration. He's a lot of fun to play, and honestly, I just really like Dead by Daylight. Here's my concept art for a Jipe Totek skin. Call me Dead by Daylight. I don't know if that's what the company is, but Canadian. Ultimately, my thesis, if I were to word it that way, but This isn't an academic video. My hot take about the Hellraiser series is that it's a fertile ground for stories. That's when it's at its best, is when it's kind of this pot that you can put your plant in and then see what it grows into. Sometimes it's a weird looking plant with a plot that makes no sense. Sometimes it's a cool looking plant with a weak script. Sometimes it's a plant that's just doing its best, but it's always something interesting. There is something so unique and creative in all the movies and even the comics, even if it doesn't completely line up with the tone of the universe or match the original intent of the series, people still do really interesting things with it. And that's what makes it good, and that's what makes it interesting to watch and fun to watch. There's no one movie that doesn't have at least one element that I admire. I'm very much looking forward to these new interpretations. The important point is that Hellraiser's pretty good. I guess I recommend it. Is that how you end a video? That's it. I don't have anything else to say. Thanks for watching. We certainly saw sights, didn't we? My Lemons configuration was provided by J. Bart Creations on Etsy. This is a wonderful prop and is so much fun to play with. I have yet to do it in hard mode because I'm a coward